What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 29 preview, and I'm going to start off by talking about captaincy. Now, this is the list that I've come up with of who I think the best options are. Before anyone asks, no, I probably wouldn't go for a single Game Week player this week, not even Bukayo Saka against Leeds at home. It's the biggest double Game Week we're going to get all season. I think you've got to be going for a double Game Week player. At least that's what I'll be doing. Now, I've got Rashford as the best option for Game Week 29. I know at the time of recording, he's yellow flagged, he's listed as having a knock, 75% chance of playing. He didn't go away with England, right? And now, I think if he was fit, he would have been in that squad, so there might be some kind of issue there, but I also think that Man United have played so many games this season, he might have just needed a rest. Bearing in mind, since the World Cup, they've been playing every 3 to 4 days, and Rashford has started pretty much every single one of those games. So if Ten Hag says he's fine, then you presume he'll start against Newcastle away because he's been one of Man United's best players this season, and therefore he'll probably play against Brentford at home as well, because he's done that a lot, right? Played in the Premier League, then played in Europe, played in the Premier League, then played in the Carabao Cup, etc. So I don't see a huge issue there. But if Ten Hag does put any doubts in our mind about whether or not he's going to start this Newcastle game, or whether he can get to kind of 90 minutes or something like that, then maybe you look elsewhere, because there are a lot of other options. But generally, especially since the World Cup, he's played 90 minutes pretty much every single game. And even this Wolves game where he played 45, that was a disciplinary issue why he didn't start. I think he was late to a meeting or something like that. So Ten Hag didn't start him, he just brought him on. And he has blanked against Southampton and Liverpool, last 2 league games, but it wasn't that long ago the guy couldn't stop scoring, and people were talking about him as a captain over Haaland, so I think we shouldn't forget that. And when you look at the other players on the list, Rashford's goal threat is pretty high at 0.45 expected goals per 90. No one else really comes that close, apart from Salah, who also has more assist threat and is on penalties and is pretty much guaranteed to play 90 minutes for all of Liverpool's remaining games. But this week he's got Chelsea away and Man City away, and I think those fixtures kind of hurt him as a captain option. So I prefer Rashford. Now, I've seen some, not a huge amount, of doubts about him, not just because of the yellow flag, but also because of his fixtures, because on paper, Newcastle away and Brentford at home doesn't look that great, but I think it's perfectly fine. Like, Newcastle this season have been a great defence, but they can be got at. If you look at their expected goals conceded, this tab here, against Wolves, they conceded 1.12, Man City 1.34, Liverpool 1.62, Bournemouth 1.83, and don't get me wrong, they probably play Bournemouth another 10 times, and not concede that many chances, but they can be gotten at. And we shouldn't forget that Man United are one of the best attacks in the league, and Rashford is obviously one of the best attackers, so even against Newcastle, they will get chances. And then similarly, Brentford have done really well in some games since the restart after the World Cup. Like, you look here, 0.45 against Bournemouth, 0.5 against Leeds, but these aren't teams you consider one of the best attacks in the league, whereas when they played Arsenal, 1.68, Fulham 1.42, Leicester 1.35, they can be gotten at by teams who are good in attack, and that is Man United. So I think Rashford is the best option. Whether or not Fernandes is the next option, I'm a little bit unsure about whether or not the Brighton midfielders should be ahead, because obviously Fernandes has got the same fixtures, but he doesn't quite have the goal threat. He's much more likely to get you an assist, but he is first choice penalty taker. I just think if it's a choice between Rashford and Fernandes, I prefer Rashford right now. And if Rashford's not available and Casemiro's also out, I don't know how much of a good option that makes Fernandes, which is why I've got him behind every single Brighton midfielder, and I've put them all as one because everyone's got their own preference of who the best option is. So whoever you have earmarked as your number one Brighton choice, that should be the captain this week. I guess you could provide a bit more context for 29 specifically, in that Solly March has had 2 weeks off. Mitoma and McAllister have travelled, even though I think they're going to come back and be fine for the weekend. March has had a 2-week rest. But also, we got to factor in that McAllister keeps playing as a number 10. That seems likely to continue for the next few weeks. His underlying numbers, expected goals, expected assists, have been very good when he's played that position, and he's on penalties. So you could make an argument, forget about the long term, just looking at game week 29, McAllister McAllister is the best Brighton midfielder, and therefore if you don't want to go for Rashford, you could look at McAllister as your kind of next best captain. Then I would go for Fernandes. I think after the other Brighton midfielders, then I would go for Fernandes. I think there's a lot of talk about Casemiro being out, but I'd be surprised if two of kind of Sabitzer, Fred and McTominay, if they're fit, don't play in that kind of pivot instead, allowing Bruno Fernandes to play in that number 10. He might come deep at times to get the ball and progress it. He might play on the right sometimes as well, but I still think he's a pretty good option this week. I think people are using Casemiro as a bit of an excuse because they don't really want to go for him. I don't know, sometimes you might not get him because you genuinely think Casemiro out is an issue, but sometimes you can use it as an excuse when you're just not really wanting to go for that player anyway. But I still think he's a really good option this week, and I'd have him ahead of Maddison for captaincy because his goal threat's only slightly worse, but his assist threat is better, and he is on penalties. Maddison might be on penalties, to be honest, right? I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I mean, when Vardy's not on the pitch, he's obviously first choice penalty taker, and he hasn't played a lot recently. Tielemans is also out at the moment as well. I'm not sure how long for. Let's just double check. This is the kind of thing you get on this channel. You get a lack of research before you actually start recording. I'm recording on the fly. I think Tielemans is out for a while. Yeah, 16th of April, so he wouldn't be back until maybe game week 31 or 32. So until then, we're not quite sure who the penalty taker is. You'd assume whoever plays number 9, whether that's Iheanacho or Daka, would take the penalty. But it could be Maddison. So possibly with the fixtures they've got, Leicester, he might be slightly better than Fernandes. You can kind of decide yourself. But I'd have Fernandes ahead. I'd still have Salah on the list, even though he's in kind of 5th place, because he is just such a great FPL option. Penalties, guaranteed minutes, really good goal threat, also chips in with assists as well. But obviously he is playing Chelsea away and Man City away. And if he blanked twice, it wouldn't necessarily completely surprise me. But it also wouldn't be that shocking if he got 12 to 15 points plus, because I do think he's that good. And I feel like, without making this another Salah show, I feel like people have kind of forgotten how good he's been recently, because all they've got in their head is that missed penalty against Bournemouth. And I presume he's still going to be on penalties. They're not just going to take him off them because he missed one. But he got the 21-pointer against Man United, 8 points against Wolves. He blanked against Palace, 6 against Newcastle, 11 against Everton. They're not mega hauls like 15 points plus, but he has been very consistent for quite a few weeks. And I think a lot of people got him in for the double. And obviously then a lot of us looked very stupid to get rid of him before Man United. And he was only a missed penalty away from another 7 to 10 points as well. So if he got on that, I think people would be slightly more happy to bring him in for this week. Don't get me wrong, the fixtures on paper are not great, but I don't think you can now list him as this really bad option. I think I would captain Salah ahead of any of the single game week options, right? So whether or not you should sell Saka to Salah, completely different conversation, because that's not captaincy. But if I was captaining one of them this week, I would probably captain Salah ahead of Saka. And then last on the list is Havertz. To be honest, I was kind of struggling with who the 6th pick should be. Should it be Havertz, Isak, Watkins, Ings? Essentially, I think there's much better options than all of those players. So that should only be someone you go for if you just want to go massively differential. You've got that gut feeling or something like that. But for me, it's Rashford. Then it would be a Brighton midfielder. Probably McAllister first. But if you prefer March or Matoma, you should go for them instead. Then Fernandes, then Maddison, then Salah. Let me know below how wrong I've got that. Who is your number 1 choice this week? All right, let's answer some of your questions. So what's your thoughts on Ferguson as an FPL option? I'm thinking of going for him as he's a very cheap way into the Brighton attack without taking up a midfield spot. And I think that last point is quite important because we already know who's doubling in 29 and in game week 34. And so therefore we know which teams we want to target. So if you want an attacker from Man United, for example, then really they're going to be midfielders, right? It's going to be Rashford and or Fernandes, because if you start looking at the players listed as forwards, then you've got Weghorst and Martial, and not many people are going to get excited about that. So Ferguson being listed as a forward, not a midfielder, could be kind of handy. I think the best way to talk about this is probably on the FPL page. So I know I've mentioned this quite a lot, but just bear with me. There is a point to this. This is the midfield 5 I've talked about going for from game week 34, because they've all got a double that week. Salah, Fernandes, March, Matoma and Rashford. Some of you might want a different midfielder in there. And for a lot of people right now, that is Bukayo Saka. So if you're going to sacrifice someone, with only one double game week after 29, possibly that player would be Salah. So you could just put Saka back in there instead. The only thing that I would be thinking of is for Liverpool, if I can find Salah again. They're doubling 34. is Spurs at home and Fulham at home. So I think that's pretty good from an attacking point of view. So if you don't go for Salah, you're looking for someone else. Well, Diaz, who apparently is back in training, is also listed as a midfielder, and so is Gakpo. So they're not really options because you've got no slot for them. Then it's Firmino, Jota or Darwin as a forward. But the problem is I've just listed off a lot of players. If all those players are fit by game week 34, Jota, Darwin, Firmino, Gakpo, Diaz and Salah, that is 6 players for 3 spots, and the only one you could almost guarantee to start every single game is Salah. So it's like that domino effect. It's all well and good saying I'll get a different Liverpool attacker, but none of them are anywhere near as good as Salah, you would say. So you'd probably, if you want a Liverpool attacker, I'd say it's got to be Salah, right? And obviously you might have your own preferences, that's fine, but this is just from my point of view. I've already just said you can't really sacrifice Fernandes or Rashford for someone else because that would be Weghorst or Martial. So then potentially you do just drop a Brighton midfielder instead. So I could drop March, have Saka in there, and then just drop Kane and have Ferguson instead, right? That could possibly work. You've got your triple up of Estepinian, Mitoma and Ferguson. You can have a different midfielder, different defender, etc. You could do this same exercise with 2 defenders as well. So you could have Estepinian and Dunk, or Steele and one of the defenders plus a midfielder. That could work. The problem I have with that, and the only slight thing against Ferguson, is that Brighton are very important to us for the rest of the season because they've got 4 double game weeks, okay? Starting with a really good one in game week 29, which is Brentford at home and Bournemouth away. Now, to be fair, straight away after that, they're not that important because it's Spurs away, Chelsea away and a blank. But from game week 33 till the end of the season, there are 6 game weeks and 3 of them are going to be double game weeks with Brighton. And when they've got that many extra fixtures versus all the other FPL options, I just feel like you want the best 3, and I would question whether Ferguson is part of that because his minutes are just not guaranteed. Like if you look at it recently, he doesn't always start, and when he does start, he pretty much always comes off early. Now, I think as a player, he is great. His underlying numbers look pretty good, 0.43 expected goals per 90. He started both games for Ireland during the international break. So they've got high hopes for him and all that kind of stuff. But obviously he is very young and he is being used as a player not to play 90 minutes, right? He hasn't actually played 90 minutes for Brighton at all this season in the Premier League. So even when he does start, like he did in 24, 26 and 27, he's come off early. And so I would say with that many extra fixtures, it's probably best just to get the other 3 Brighton players you think are the best picks. So basically 3 of Steele, hope he keeps his place, Estepinian, Dunk, March, Mitoma and McAllister, because like I said, they're going to be so useful to you before the end of the season. And don't get me wrong, if this was game week 1 and there were no double game weeks on the horizon and you were playing a 3-5-2 or something like that, Evan Ferguson would absolutely be your third forward to sit on the bench to be called upon when needed, because for 4.6 million he's an absolute bargain. For that price, he is the best forward, but when you're thinking about the best Brighton options, I don't think he's one of them. So personally, I would rather get my second Brighton midfielder instead and sacrifice one of these players. I'm not going to go into a huge discussion about which one you sacrifice, but that is what I would personally rather do than go for Ferguson. If you're dead set on the midfield you want, then he is probably the next best option. I just think after game week, or from 33 onwards, you're going to want players you can rely upon. And when you look at the minutes for all the Brighton midfielders that you'd be looking at, if I just get rid of this name here, they all get pretty good minutes. Like you look at Solly March, not many games where he hasn't played kind of 80 to 90 minutes. Similarly with Mitoma, when was the last time he didn't play? Back in game week 16, right? Under De Zerbi, he has played a hell of a lot. And obviously we know that McAllister is absolutely nailed on penalty taker as well. So just to come back to the question, I think Ferguson's great. And I think in different circumstances he'd be in most people's teams. But I think Brighton is so important for the rest of the season, there's other players that I would pick instead. Alright, is free hit 34 an option to maximise the double game week? And the short answer is yes. Any game week, especially one designated as a blank or a double game week, is worth considering using the free hit in. And one of the benefits to saving it until game week 34 is you've got the most amount of information possible before the game week actually starts. So it's all well and good me sitting here telling you, well, I'm going to be well set up for double game week 34. I've already got loads of plans over the next few weeks to bring in more Man City, more Liverpool, more Man United, etc. But all I need is a few injuries to derail that plan, and suddenly maybe it's better for me to use the free hit in 34. And I'm going to show you a free hit 34 team in just a second. But for my personal team as things stand, this is what it looks like. I've got my 3 Brighton players already. I've got a plan to get Haaland back, and I've got Rashford. So that's already 5 players that are going to blank in game week 32, and I'll probably add at least another 1 or 2 Man United players. So straight away, that's 7 players that are blanking in 32. I'll probably have limited amount of Arsenal players before they play Southampton, and I'll possibly have no Liverpool players before they play Nottingham Forest at home. So for me, it just makes more sense the way my team is built right now to free hit in game week 32. You might be looking at your team for 29, thinking I want to keep all my Arsenal players. I don't want to overload on Man United, Chelsea, etc. So I can get through the game week 32 blank with no issues, and therefore I'm going to use it in game week 34. That's perfectly fine. You should absolutely do that if that works better for your team. And if you're someone thinking, well, I can get through game week 32 and 34 without any issues, you could possibly save it until game week 37, which, although it's not confirmed yet, should be another kind of small double game week. And I guess the benefits of that are, what if Man United and Man City are still in Europe or something like that? Maybe at that point, because they're in the latter rounds or the later stages, there might be a bit more rotation. So perhaps you can free hit some differentials in. But ultimately, I think the free hit is less powerful this season because so many teams are doubling more than once that you can just kind of get them in now. And if they don't get injured, they're just going to see you through to the end of the season. Last year, for example, in game week 37, I checked my free hit team yesterday, actually. It had I think it was triple Leicester, triple Everton, and maybe triple Aston Villa or something like that. And the reason that was such a success is, one, we got very lucky with how well Leicester did. I think they absolutely smashed Watford or something like that. But also, we didn't need those players outside of game week 37. So being able to free hit them in and then not worrying about them having them in game week 38 was really handy. Whereas this season, Man United are going to double in 29 and in 34 and in 37. So if Rashford, Fernandes and Luke Shaw and De Gea play all of those games, who cares about the free hit? Because they're just good to carry all the way through. Likewise, we know Brighton, 4 double game weeks. Man City, double game week in 34, probably another one in game week 37. The free hit is just less powerful than it was last season. So you need to look at your own team and basically decide, is it worth it in 32? Does that fit my transfer plans better, or does it make more sense to just hold it until 34? And if you can get through 29 and 32 without issues, save it until 34 and later and just use it whenever you kind of need it. But this is kind of a free hit team you could put together. Essentially, you're mostly going to be picking Man City, Liverpool, Man United and Brighton players. You could absolutely put a third Man City player in here instead, like De Bruyne instead of Salah, maybe Foden, Mahrez or Grealish or someone like that if they look nailed on. If there's a nailed on defender, you could go for one of them, etc. But it's not going to look too dissimilar to this. And I know from my own plans, which may or may not go perfectly over the next few weeks, I'm probably going to have Ederson and Haaland and Salah and Rashford and Fernandes and Shaw and triple Brighton. So that's already 9 players, and I'm hopeful I'm going to have a transfer for Trent Alexander-Arnold as well. So my other player in game week 34 will probably be someone like Trippier, and I would absolutely rather have Robertson, but Trippier's got Southampton at home, so it's not even that big of an issue. So as good as that looks on paper, I think because so many of these teams are doubling more than once before the end of the season, for most people it's just going to be easy to get to. And ultimately, the end of this season, at least what it looks like on paper, is just going to be a lot more boring than previous seasons because there's just not enough reasons to massively differentiate. You could have March instead of McAllister, March instead of Matoma, Dunk instead of Estupinian, but these are quite close calls anyway. It's not like you're going for a completely different player instead. And even just quickly while I'm on this, about how kind of boring the end of the season looks, even in game week 34 where other teams double, Fulham is Liverpool away and who else are they playing away? Or is it at home? I can't even find out. Man City at home. Even if you wanted to go for a couple of Fulham players, they got really bad doubles. So the short answer is yes, you could absolutely use it. Do I think I'm going to be in a huge amount of trouble if I use it in 32 and not in 34? Absolutely not. So get onto a transfer planner like FPL.team, figure out what's best for your own squad, and then just go with that. All right, after talking about my master plan to get to game week 34 without a free hit, this is a good question. How far ahead are you planning right now? I've got a plan up until game week 34 with potentially nothing in the bank at that point. It's making me think about March over McAllister this week to free up some cash. Is that too long a timeline to worry about. I'm not necessarily the greatest person to ask about this because I get quite hung up on how my transfers now will affect ones in the future. And sometimes I look like 5, 6, 7, 8 game weeks ahead. And don't get me wrong, it is handy to plan. Like for game week 34, I know which players I would ideally want. How am I going to work out my transfers to get them? How much money do I need? All those things are worth thinking about. But I wouldn't get so hung up on it that you lose points in the immediate, because things can happen that affect your plans, right? Players get injured, they get suspended, they get dropped, other players come back which affect their minutes. So look at Liverpool, for example, when Diaz, Jota and Firmino were all injured and Gakpo wasn't even at the club, suddenly Darwin Núñez, his minutes are great, but once all those players are fit and available, his minutes do go down. He might still start games, but he's much more likely to come off after 60 minutes. So those things happen. You might get a price rise or a price fall that could affect your plan as well. So if I'm looking at this, I don't know whether you already own McAllister or whether you're wildcarding or something like that, but if I'm thinking I got 0 in the bank, so I'm going to swap McAllister to March this week to make sure I can do that plan, I probably wouldn't do that. If you're thinking that McAllister is the better option, and he probably is while he's playing as a number 10 with penalties as well, I would just take the points right now and worry about that plan later on. So for my team, for example, I would love to have Trent Alexander-Arnold in game week 34. But if push comes to shove and I don't have the money, well, either I'll look at a hit instead, or I'll get Robertson, who's cheaper, or Van Dijk, who's cheaper. And they might not be as good an option, but plans will get changed because stuff will happen in FPL. So I think if you've got McAllister, I would just hold him. And then when you get to game week 34, you hope that you've got that money to make the moves. If not, there's always something else you can do. You can take an additional hit, or you can get a different player instead. So I would say perfectly fine to be looking up until game week 34 about what your transfers might be right now, but just be prepared that those plans could change at some point, because stuff always happens in FPL. For example, this week, we're all talking about how we're getting Haaland back in game week 30. We don't even know if he's fit for 29. What if Pep Guardiola comes out in his press conference saying, nah, he's probably going to be out for 2 weeks? Well, all of a sudden, everyone's going to switch to not getting Haaland back until probably game week 34, and then all your transfers before that will change. So definitely have a think. You don't want to leave this stuff till the last minute, but just be prepared for everything and anything to happen in FPL which changes that plan. So I would keep McAllister. Hope you've still got the money by the time you get till 34. Otherwise, just do something else instead. All right, lots of people thinking about selling Arsenal players to Man United players this week. So is it really worth a -4 to do Martinelli to Fernandes and Zinchenko to Shaw? Obviously, that could be Odegaard to Fernandes, Gabriel to Shaw, etc. I can see Arsenal going nuclear against Leeds. Now, it goes without saying, if you think that Arsenal are going to beat Leeds like 3, 4, 5, 6-0, whatever score you've got in your mind, there's every case to be made to keep hold of them for this week. And also, one thing we forget, you can make these moves later on. They don't have to be done this week. So if you decide to keep Martinelli and Zinchenko and you want to get Fernandes and Shaw later on, well, you could do it in game weeks 30, 31, 33. Obviously, you wouldn't do it in 32 because Man United are blanking, but you could do it in game week 34, etc. So even if you think long term, Man United's fixtures are slightly better and they've got the additional doubles, you can just make that move later on if you don't do it this week. Now, in this specific example, if you told me that Martinelli, Fernandes, Zinchenko and Shaw were all going to stay fit for the rest of the season and start every single game, do I think that -4 would be paid back by the time we get to the end of double game week 34, especially if you're free hitting in 32, by the way? Once Man United have doubled again, yeah, I think it probably would. But the problem is FPL is not perfect like that. And as a recent example, think about when Nketiah was starting and Trossard came into the team for Arsenal. Well, Martinelli started to lose minutes, and in one game he didn't even start. So a lot of people were like, well, in the long term, Martinelli to Odegaard, because Odegaard's minutes are secure, will definitely pay off. The problem is Nketiah picked up a knock, Trossard started as the 9, Martinelli on the left. It worked really well that in the next game Nketiah was on the bench again, and obviously Martinelli continued to play, and he's absolutely smashed Odegaard since then. The -4 hasn't been repaid, and also a lot of us decided to wildcard in 26-27, and you could have just made that move for free, right, at that point. So the 4 points didn't get paid off in the long run because other stuff happened, and the same could happen here, right? You do Martinelli to Fernandes, Zinchenko to Shaw, Shaw gets injured in game week 30, well, suddenly that -4 doesn't look very good unless he's absolutely smashed it in game week 29 during the double. I think it's a little bit different because a lot of people have already wildcarded now, and also you're going into a double game week straight away. So for me, The reason I'm even looking at this, because I think there's potential for it to pay off straight away or in the kind of near future. So for Arsenal, for example, I'm thinking, let me just ignore that, specifically for the defender part of it, because I think a lot of people would do Gabriel to Shaw as the hit. Leeds at home in 29 versus a double of Newcastle away, Brentford at home. Could Luke Shaw score more than 4 points? Possibly, although we saw Gabriel get a 14-pointer recently against Fulham. But then they go straight into Liverpool away. Now, can Arsenal beat Liverpool away from home? Yes. Do I think Arsenal concede in that game? Also, yes. Whereas Man United have got Everton at home. Then they got Nottingham Forest away. I'm ignoring 32 because I feel like this is even more beneficial to those people that are free hitting. If you're not free hitting, that -4 is probably not worth it. And then it's like Man City away, Chelsea at home. So I think there's a chance the Gabriel to Shaw move pays off straight away. And if not, if they both stay fit, I'm almost certain it will happen in the future, although that's not guaranteed. So don't feel pressured into making this move. But also, try and think about what's most likely to happen, not what could happen. I've talked about that a lot recently. Like, I think we always picture the perfect thing happening. That's just not how FPL works. So if you said to me Arsenal are going to beat Leeds like 6-0, of course that could happen. Arsenal are great. Leeds have got a bunch of players missing, and their defence just isn't great anyway. Is that realistically what's going to likely happen most of the time? Probably not. It'd probably be like 3-0. And obviously that is still a lot of points potential. But if I keep Odegaard and sell Saka, or keep Saka and sell Odegaard, it's the other one that scores, I'm no better off because Arsenal have smashed Leeds because I've got the wrong player. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this, but I personally am someone that likes to target the double game week, so I'm much more likely to do it and just hope it pays off this week, because if it does, I'm very happy about that move in the future. So let me know down in the comments below, if you've got Arsenal players, how many do you have and how many are you thinking about selling in game week 29? Alright, so assuming we are bench boosted in game week 29, how many double game week players is the minimum needed to make the bench boost viable? And I would say there is no minimum number. There'll be squads out there with 4 single game week players on the bench, and game week 29 will still be the best time to bench boost. Obviously, we've known about this big double game week for a while, so hopefully people have been planning for it, and they're going to have at least 1 or 2 double game week players on the bench. But it's not the end of the world if you've got 4 single game week players. So if you look at my team, for example, let's say that Botman and Rashford are fit, and I'm not making any other transfers to this team. Do I think that Raya, Gabriel, Kane and Odegaard is a good bench boost? I would say yes. The only question is, can I get a better bench boost in a double game week later on? Well, the next double is game week 34. And if I want to try and get out a good double game week team and a good double game week bench, I've got to make a lot of transfers that's probably going to be detrimental to my overall score just to get that good bench boost out. So I would rather bench boost with 3 single game week players, even 4, and not have to worry about my bench for the next kind of 4 or 5 weeks. So I would say for most of you, if you'd planned to bench boost in 29, you should probably be doing it this week regardless, unless there's a lot of injuries, right? If I've not made any transfers yet for my team, but let's say Botman's out and Rashford is out for the first game, and suddenly I'm making a transfer for Odegaard and Gabriel, but I want to bench like Botman, but I'm not sure he's going to start one or both of the games, then I might just bail on the bench boost completely. But that's because of a lot of injuries. It's not because I'm worried about benching or bench boosting with single game week players. For what it's worth, and just because it's happened in the past doesn't mean it will again, I don't think over the last 3 seasons I have bench boosted with a full double game week bench. I think one year I went like Martinez for Villa, possibly, with a double game week, and then 3 Arsenal players with a single game week. Like once I bench boosted with 2 Burnley, 2 Southampton, no double game week, just because I think it's best to use it straight after, or as close to possible after a wildcard. I wildcarded in game week 26. I already hate that I'm waiting until game week 29 to bench boost. I don't think I could wait until game week 34. You start making bad transfers for your team just to get out a good bench. It's just not worth it. So there is no minimum number. Most of you are going to have at least a double game week goalkeeper. If you've got a good other 3 players, whether they're single game weeks or double game weeks, in most cases, I would just go for it. There we go. Hopefully you enjoyed that one and found it useful. If you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I'll be back tomorrow with my team selection video ahead of game week 29. I'll talk through my thoughts on transfers and stuff like that. And on Friday, it's going to be final thoughts. So I'll cover any other questions that I've missed today, plus the latest press conference information and stuff like that. And obviously deadline stream on Saturday. So like I said, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.